Our guest today is Elizabeth Rossiello, CEO and founder of AZA Finance. Elizabeth began her career as a translator in the German parliament and speaks 5 languages. Her passion for microfinance took her to Nairobi, where she lived for many years before moving to Senegal. Fun fact, Elizabeth is also a skilled ballerina, having danced for 15 years even while founding AZA Finance. In her talk, How Do You Build When No One Believes in What You're Building?, Elizabeth shares her extraordinary journey of perseverance and innovation. AZA Finance, which turned 10 in 2023, is a leading payments infrastructure company for many household names. Let's dive into Elizabeth's incredible journey and hear her insights on building against the odds.
Happy to be here in Ghana today. So they asked me when I was going to do this to say a fact about myself that nobody knows. I've been speaking publicly for over a decade, so I had to really think about it. And I mentioned ballet. So I wore my slippers today so you guys can see what I was talking about. And when a founder says that they're a ballerina, it's believable, right? Ballerinas are resilient. They're strong, deceptively small, but made out of muscle. That's something that you expect and that you've heard from founders. Resilience, strength, they have a chip on their shoulder, they can survive anything, and there have been many founders that have spoken on this topic. But how do you keep going in the right direction through all these tough times? When people tell you no again and again and again. This morning, the vice president, I don't know if you heard, mentioned the name of my first company, BitPesa. And I had a shock of electricity because it was exactly 11 years ago when we did our first presentation to the Central Bank of Kenya about Bitcoin and blockchain. And at the time, they thought we were coming from outer space. Now, how did we know we were on the right path and that a decade later, the vice president would be mentioning us as an example of innovation that was working and that was on the right track? We know that you have to put the haters, put the naysayers out of your mind, but how are you sure you're going in the right direction? And that's the advice that I want to share with you today, which is to become an expert in something that nobody's an expert in, and go back to basics, go back to that ballet bar every day, and make sure you stay an expert. My first job was in investment banking, where I had to get up early, 5:30 a.m., and write the research that the rest of my team regurgitated all day. And I couldn't believe that a 22-year-old was in charge of writing the things that all these big guys said to all these big funds all day. It was really eye-opening. My research was something that they were going to use. Later on, I left investment banking and chose the path and walked and went to Nairobi, Kenya, and I became a microfinance rating analyst. And I worked all across the continent writing reports about what I saw in the field. And I would publish the report, I'd give it to a big donor or an investor, and they didn't know what was in the report. And I thought, how can they not know? How can this research be so innovative? I'm not that smart. I'm not dropped from outer space. What I realized was a lot of people don't do their homework. A lot of people don't do their research. They don't do their field work. And that's what we need to do as founders and entrepreneurs to stay on track. Lots of people take shortcuts. They just want to show up, do their job. They're not ready to recheck and check again to make sure they're on the right track. So when the Central Bank of Kenya was telling us no, we had years of experience working in the payment sector, working with banks, understanding how difficult it was to make a transfer, understanding the balance of payments in Africa was causing a barrier to trade. And the fact that most of the transactions on the African continent were clearing the United States dollar instead of through African currencies was blocking trade with neighboring countries, was taking SMEs out of the market. So when we heard a no, we went back to basics. Similarly, a few years ago, I'm sitting in a very fancy hotel in Paris, surrounded by 60-year-old African economists, heads of state, senior leaders, and I'm sitting in the corner, pregnant, 8 months, a little 5'2" girl in my ballerina shoes, waiting for my turn to speak. And everybody is speaking about the monetary policy in Africa. but they're talking in the same direction. They're all validating each other with the same data. They are experts, but they're all experts in the same thing. On the second day, it's my turn to speak, and I stand up and I waddle forward and I talk about synthetic currency swaps. And what if we use digital payments to enable the use of African currencies against each other? What if you could trade the Senegalese franc with the Central African franc against the Ugandan shilling, against the Zambian kwacha, without going through the US dollar? What would it look like if we used an innovative product to solve a problem in a way that hadn't been solved before? And because I had done my research, because I had 9 years of fieldwork at the time to share with them, customer experiences, performance rates, metrics on pricing, economic data to support that when companies traded with us, they grew their revenues, I was listened to. So the no's became a yes. We actually won one of our biggest clients at that meeting, and 4 years later, they just did the highest revenue transaction we've ever had last month. So again, back to that research, to that expertise that no one else is doing. Go where nobody else has gone before. And it's lonely sometimes. We have on our Slack channel an ability to post news notices about other startups. And there's always a new employee who posts a competing startup or a startup in an adjacent sector that just raised some money or launched a new product. And it's very tempting to join the pack. It's very tempting to quickly rush all your resources together and follow what's being happening somewhere else. But those who've been at our company a while know we ignore the trend, we ignore the news, and we go to the data. If we're so bothered by a news item that comes out, we say, well, let's do a survey. Let's ask our customers. Let's go in market and do some field research. Let's talk to our sales traders and see what the pricing differential on the ground is. Let's not follow secondary, tertiary, or even gossip, data that's not produced with our knowledge. That's the key insight when you're operating in a vacuum of no. And I think for us, just like when I was a ballerina, I respect the dancers next to me, the ones I see that are at the bar, that are sweating, that are working there every day. When you have a venture capitalist in San Francisco that hasn't done the data, that hasn't been in the room, that has no sweat on them, you can ignore that no. And you can brush it off your shoulder and say, we expect the no's. And over time, if you follow the data, your thesis can be validated. And eventually, the market comes around and joins you, but from behind, while you remain at the front as an innovator. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. Thank you so much.